Kimberly, hi. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, you open the book, actually, well, it's Cameron Diaz in her foreword for you. And something that she said is when she met you, she didn't anticipate that you would end up being one of the greatest teachers in her life. And she says that you've shown her by example what true strength and courage looks like. The Kimberly I met all those years ago is still, in many ways, the Kimberly I know today, equal parts kind and determined, fierce and vulnerable. And I love that. I love those both sides. And it's really what I want to focus on with the episode today is like seeing those both sides because you are so badass, like kick ass on the screens, fighting for your own life, fighting against people who have hurt you. But equally, I think the story you tell is like a reclamation of also the most vulnerable parts of yourself. The little Kimberly who felt a lot of shame and felt unprotected and felt hurt, and your journey to loving her rather than exiling her.
Yes, completely.
I want to go, though, to the opening scene where you describe recording for I Am Legend and falling through a glass window. And that in the early days of you working in this stunt scene, you had a badge of honor for the pain. And that was a sense of, I am tough, I am strong, I am resilient. Can you walk us through what happened that day?
I did a high fall out of a window that was planned, and I was on a wire, and it was a descender. So it's supposed to stop you about 5 feet before you hit the ground. You're never supposed to hit the ground. That's in a separate shot. And we had rehearsed it a bunch without the window, and it was all fine. And then when we went to shoot it, I flew past my end mark, and that was the riggers. It was a mistake on their part, which happens sometimes in our business. And I went flying onto the floor, which then had a bunch of glass on it because I went through the glass. The glass obviously falls faster. So it was on the floor, and then I just kind of landed in it. My face did. So I got severely cut up.
Severely. And yet you soldiered on, did you not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Walk us through what was going through your mind at that moment in time.
Nothing really at that moment in time. When I tell the story, I'm telling it from a much more healed space in my life, which, so 3 years ago when I started writing, that happened, 15 plus years ago. So in that time when it happened, I was very clueless as to what was actually really going on. And until I started doing the work in healing and writing, was I really able to reflect on my past and how much my shame and pain of my abuse was showing up in other avenues of my life that I really wasn't connecting the dots at that time, where now I've been able to really connect the dots and look at, okay, that's not a normal behavior to have when your face is bleeding and you need stitches and you know that you do. Most normal, sane people go to the hospital. And it was something that I just sort of, I think, felt like I deserved, felt like I was getting this attention from this injury because it was on my face and no one could not look at it. So I was getting attention that I so needed in other aspects of my life, and that I was just sort of eating up in a way because I was crying out for help in my life, in my personal life, and I wasn't getting the help that I needed.
I so praise you for your honesty in that, because so many people would not be able to sit here and own up to that there was that part of me that liked that attention. I wanted that. I sought that out. You say I sought out my triggers. It's very brave. Yeah.
Yes.
But I guess it was that in essence, there was something going through your mind at that time. Whilst it wasn't from the healed perspective, it was get up, soldier on. It's not too bad, or, a perverse almost form of love that you realize that you didn't have before, but so desperately needed.
Yes, completely. And I grew up in an environment where my father was, ex-Marine. He went to Vietnam. We were raised in a very much, we don't cry. We weren't allowed to cry. That's how it was spoken about in my house. We don't cry. And obviously this horrific thing was happening to me as a child throughout my entire childhood, and nobody was doing anything about it. And I do believe that there is a big correlation between people that do endurance sports and trauma. I see it with a lot of my friends that are stunt people that have a lot of trauma in their childhood, and a lot of it is sexual abuse.
Why do you think that is?
Because there's something familiar about pushing our body to the ultimate limit, and that we need to achieve something so massive to get any sort of validation because we never got it as children. So we're going to put ourselves in this space where we are going to be validated. And for me, it was, doing massive movies and doubling massive movie stars. And I got this attention that I never got as a kid. And I was using my body to achieve that attention. So in retrospect, I was actually sort of abusing my body just in a different way, and even though I wasn't responsible for the abuse in the first place, we often blame ourselves inadvertently or in a shame-based way. And I think I was just living that out in my adult life.
I think it comes up for so many people in different ways, of course, but the core beliefs that we have internalized from early on in our childhood that we sometimes unconsciously act out for a number of years until hopefully for all of us that there is that wake up call, there is that realization that, hold on a second, we deserve better than this. At some point we were taught that we are unworthy, that there's something wrong with us or damaged or broken at a deeper fundamental level. And then you realize that's not true at all. That's just a belief that has been stored that needs to be overcome.
Yeah. And I think the trickiest part about that is that I don't really believe it's something that's stored in our brains as it is just in our nervous system, because it's very easy for me to sit here and say, I know that being abused as a child was not my fault. I know that a lot of adults let me down and failed me. But what is my body actually feeling and storing is completely different than what I can say in my, adult brain. But I know that my body still feels it and stores it and reacts in certain ways because of it.
Absolutely. And this is why I say it on the podcast a lot. A lot of other people who've come on have spoken about it, the importance of body work. And I think that's why a lot of people who have traditional talk therapy realize it doesn't work, because what we think we know on a cognitive level is not what is stored deeper in our cells. Let's go over to a little bit about your childhood. I want to hear about, where did you grow up? What was your house like? What was your family life like?
I grew up in Long Island, New York, and I had 3 sisters. I don't speak about them all in the book because they weren't supportive or happy with me telling my story. And my mom stayed home with us, and my dad was a Mason. And yeah, we had a very simple, painful life.
What was your mum like? What was her personality and your dynamic with her?
Completely disconnected from herself, and she still is, because it was her father who abused me, and he also abused her. And unfortunately, my mom, I'm dealing with a lot of things with her now in my present life. She has done a lot of talk therapy, and I think that's the biggest thing that I sort of want to relay to people, because I've seen it so much in my family. Well, I've been to therapy for 10 years. I've been to therapy for 20 years. That's why I go to therapy. And it realistically, like you were saying, talk therapy, when you have complex trauma on this level, it just doesn't help. You may feel better in the moment. It's basically like you're talking to your girlfriend and you're just sort of telling or saying your feelings, but you're not reconnecting with yourself. You're not reconnecting with your inner child that actually needs to be healed through all of this. And you're not actually doing the work. It's sort of this false narrative of doing the work. And I don't really believe that it is actually doing the work.
Yeah, I think it's It's an easy way for us to stay very ego-based, very mind, very closed off from actually our true self. And then you can almost deceive yourself into thinking that you are healing something by talking about it. But I genuinely believe that if it's coming from a place of disconnection where you're not actually allowing yourself to feel anything associated with what you're saying, it's almost like another form of dissociation, another form of being like, I'm cut off, I'm not there. Exactly what you're saying with your mother here of like, I think you say at one point in the book you could have clicked your fingers in front of her and she wouldn't have been there. Where is she
Yeah.
going? She's hiding into her deep recesses. I think you say behind her steel door.
Mhm. And she always explained it. She always explained it like that. Like, I have this steel door, I have this steel door, which is interesting to me because in moments she can be really clear as to her disconnection, but she hasn't found her way back to herself, which is it's very sad, you know?
And how does that affect you?
Um, Now that I have a family of my own and I have a daughter, I've had to make really difficult decisions when it comes to my family, and I have slowly sort of walked away from everybody, and my mom recently has been the last person because there's still all sort of participating in this really toxic way of behaving because it's the only way we've ever known, and they're all, in my opinion, trauma bonded to each other. And we've only known trauma our whole life. That's how we've known each other. That's how we've communicated, is all through our trauma. So we've never been able to be in a healed space or be our authentic selves to each other. And that's just not acceptable to me anymore, because in order for me to show up for my daughter in the best way possible, I have to be real to myself and true to myself. And when we heal, it's returning to our whole selves again, our authentic selves. And when we don't know who that is
Yes.
because of what happened to us, we've got to figure it out and find it and learn. And, it's quite the journey. Still on it.
Oh gosh, me too. Me too, and I think and this is so part of it. It's like I think so many of us just wish for this to be over, right? Like you can suddenly go, okay, my healing is over. I've processed it all, it's good, and now I can go on and live the rest of my life. But I think it's not the reality, right? Like we still experience triggers every time we're invited to level up in life. Stuff resurfaces. That's just the reality. Like I have had processed the healing myself from, my narcissistic ex-partner. And that did involve a lot of body work, first getting to safety, then breath work and a lot of somatic therapies essentially. But then now I've been starting my own business. That same unworthiness wound that I had back then is now resurfacing now. Who do you think you are to do this? Do you really
Mhm.
have what it takes? Comparing yourself to other people, it shows up in a different way. And I think maybe in some respects, there's almost like a thread, if you imagine like a thread throughout our life, that there is something there is a core wound, there is something there, whether that's unworthiness or feeling misunderstood your whole life, like the black sheep, the person who doesn't fit in. I think that there'll be something that we carry throughout life with us, but rather than wishing that to be cut completely, like I'm going to fully overcome that. I don't know, it's a controversial point because so many people say you can heal that completely. You can really, truly feel worthy at your core. What's your take on this?
I don't think that's actually possible. I think part of the healing process is, like you're saying, being able to recognize it. And obviously you are, like like you said, you're starting a new business and being able to recognize, oh gosh, this is showing up. That's coming from a healed space, or you wouldn't recognize it in the first place. You know what I'm saying? Because for so many years, I'm sure you didn't recognize it and things would show up and maybe you would give up or you wouldn't, follow through with it because that fear was bigger than your belief in yourself. And now it sounds like it might be turning around and it's the opposite. Like, yes, I believe in myself. I see this fear. I can recognize it and I can deal with it and work through it to where you couldn't before. And that's all part of the healing process. And it really depends on the level that we're hurt, right? I mean, there's big T's and little T's. And when we have really big T's, for me personally, I don't see me ever being like arrived at this space where I don't have those insecurities or feelings or pains anymore. I think that they'll be present in my life forever, but it's how big they show up and how I deal with them and sort of dismantle them in my own life.
Yeah. And how I find also how quickly you can come back to center. Like you can return to home or that whole authentic self. The journey is for us to work towards that. I think that's the thing when we have these triggers. It's like, I think you describe at some point in the book, you said, I realized that suppression didn't work because there would be things that happen beyond my control. You know, you would smell Old Spice, the cologne that your grandfather used to wear, and all of a sudden that would trigger that memory and you would have a flashback. And that's something that's beyond your control.
Yes. Yes. And I think when you've had trauma like I've had, that sometimes your triggers are your family members, which is something that I'm really learning that's very tricky, because when your family isn't healing and you are, and you're not in the same headspace anymore, the way that they behave, the way that they treat you, the things that they might say are triggering. And what I was noticing with myself is that I had to be somebody different for every single person in my family. I had to show up as this person for my one sister, this person for my other sister, and so on and so on. And so I was losing myself in all of that. I didn't even know who I was because I had to sort of play the game with everyone to make sure that everyone was happy. And in turn, I was really hurting myself.
Why did you feel the need to do that though?
I think because they were in a certain aspect in my brain, like my lifeline. They're all I've ever known. And I think I was sort of just drowning in my trauma and in theirs as well. And we had, especially me and my older sister, we've been through things together that nobody understands. Only the two of us understand it. And for so long, I fought for our relationship when it was probably the most unhealthy relationship I've ever had in my life. But I wanted it to work and I wanted her to be okay so much that I was willing to sacrifice myself for that until I wasn't.
What were some of the things that characterized that relationship?
My older sister is really tricky because we were just completely different with dealing with what had happened to us. And her mind, it was, I know what happened to me. I never want to look at this again. If I go there, I'll never come back. Those are her exact words. If I go there, I'll never come back. And I was always of the mindset, I need to go there so I can come back to myself. And we just always felt differently about that. And I wanted her to just see things that I can't make her see. She has to see them herself and she has to want them herself. And we haven't spoken probably almost 4 years. And that was really painful and really hard. And I love her very much, but it's not a healthy space for me at all.
I think something that I took away from your story was how much and how severe actually denial was. And I think just focusing purely on you, you know, you describe here that you were sexually abused, as was your mother, by your grandfather. And I think for so many people reading your story, hearing about your story, I think you even mentioned your husband had this too. You're like, I cannot understand how your mother could let you be in that situation when that had happened to her. Like, how is that possible? You know, and my heart went out to you, even that like the little girl who was unprotected, who so desperately needed stable, loving parents who were capable of protecting you, and yet you didn't have that.
No, I didn't have that. And my mom had repressed memories. To some extent, my grandfather was, as of all pedophiles and adults that sexually abuse children, they groom you. My grandfather groomed my mother and her siblings, and then in turn us as well. And I say this in the book, that Dr. Mattei had said to me, my first trauma was not the sexual abuse. My first trauma was that I was cut off from every adult in my life, which allowed the abuse to happen in the first place. which I think is super important because so many times when we've been molested or abused emotionally, physically, whatever it is, sexually, we grow up and we hate the abuser and we're obviously feel the way that we do, but what we're not recognizing is the whole family system that was in place to allow this to happen in the first place, which for me was adults across the board. It was my grandmother, it was my aunts, it was my uncles, it was my parents, it was everybody who stood by and let him behave in the way that he behaved when there were telltale signs that he was doing what he was doing.
Yeah. How did you feel about that?
I feel like I'm just the last 5 years just really processing that. And it's super painful. My aunt, who I speak a lot about in the book, who
Is your Aunt Pat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Her writing is in the book, and she was an incredible woman, and she spoke out about my grandfather when she was 9 years old. My daughter's 9 years old. I look at her and I'm like, oh my gosh, that he was molesting her, and nobody believed her. I believe my grandmother knew exactly what was going on forever, but nobody protected her and nobody did anything about it. And so it just went on to generations. Then you look 20 years later, I'm born, and now it's happening again. So my aunt wound up obviously having Alzheimer's, which I truly believe was her way of coping with the fact that no one was listening to her. She just completely shut up. And now that we're connecting these dots between the brain and the body, there is a big part of me that does believe that her Alzheimer's was partly just her body shutting down and her brain shutting down because she couldn't speak her truth.
She sounds like an important person for you though, and somebody who did like nourish your soul in a way. Like I felt like everything you described of her, how she wrote to you, how she did her little rituals with you, like it felt like these little tokens of care that you so needed.
Yes, I would not have written this book. I would not have the life that I have without her. 1,000,000%. I do think that she's the one who I can show the most grace to, because I feel like she was a lot like me in the truth-telling aspect, to where she was a child and spoke out. Nobody did that in my family except for her. So I do think, and then she was just shut up by everybody. And so what do you do when you're a child and the abuse is happening to you? Then you speak out about it and everyone shuts you up anyway. I mean, I can't imagine what she must have been going through in her child self. And then in her adult life to sort of cope with that and what that must have looked like for her.
Something that you wrote about was how she mentioned to you about a throat chakra. And you said, I remember you once told me the throat chakra represents the ability to speak and communicate clearly, and that the throat is where childhood abuse survivors hold a lot of their pain. The truths we couldn't speak as children get stuck there. I feel mine coming unstuck. It gave me chills when I read that. And, it's honestly something I've had too, that I turned to my husband and I said, oh my gosh, I keep hearing this. Like, whether you call it a throat chakra or pain in your throat or whatever, but it was like, yes, there is something there about holding back your truth, holding back your voice and storing pain. Did that come up for you when you started on the healing journey, like feeling your throat more in any way?
I did Reiki probably 15 years ago. Actually, Cameron sent me to her person in New York. We were shooting a movie and they just worked on my throat. And I was hysterically crying the entire time. It was crazy.
Because if anyone listening who doesn't know what Reiki is, it's kind of like energetic work, right? The premise is that you're working with your energetic body and not even putting your hands on you. I remember the first time I did this, I did it as well a couple of times. I think this is part of the healing journey, right? You just want to experiment. You're like, I'm just going to try. Yes, I'm just going to try that and that and that. And yet let's go for it. Open-minded. Why not? Stay curious, which I genuinely think helps, by the way.
Yes.
As a theme I see in everyone, staying curious is so, so important. But yeah, I went to this Reiki person going, well, I don't know what bloody woo-woo crap I'm doing now, because how is this going to work? Some lady not even putting her hands on my body. And I had the exact same experience. Exactly the same. felt like it was almost like burning. I felt like, and then I was embarrassed. It was like, I was embarrassed that I was having a reaction. She's like, it's okay. But I think being part of that thing, I'm just going to try and hold it all together.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the opposite of what you're supposed to do when you're in that situation, right?
True. Let's go a little to the part of you that really didn't want to feel vulnerable, because that is so common. How do you feel like you acted out your trauma and this deep sense of shame or self-loathing in ways before you started the healing journey?
Oh gosh, in all my relationships and all the people I chose to be in my life, and especially boyfriends, just picking guys that didn't treat me with any sort of worth, and feeling like that's what I was attracted to and that's what I deserved and that's what was familiar to me. And, obviously part of that was the abuse. And then I didn't really have any man in my life that was a loving, caretaking person. So I went out into the world, and that's what I sought out, was non-caring, non-caretaking men.
It's important to look at what we're attracted to, I think, and to dissect a little bit of a why.
Yes.
And there were earlier experiences, I guess, as well with some of your work, even before stunt work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I sort of really wanted to dance and kind of held on to that, which is interesting because Dr. Bruce Perry, who is one of the doctors who endorsed my book, who is one of the kindest men he's amazing. He's not a big presence in the social media world. So I feel like everyone sort of misses out with him a little bit, because he is just an incredible, what he does for children that have been, abused and hurt is just unbelievable. And when I spoke to him before I sent him my book, we did a Zoom call, and he was just saying to me all of the things that I chose to do in my life were really interesting because they were coping mechanisms that were actually helping me heal. Like my dance was a huge positive healing thing where I didn't even realize what it was doing to me, but he felt like it was part of what kept me sort of sane in those years, because dance is such a great tool for trauma. When you've had trauma, is just to dance. And then obviously like my bulimia and my cutting, which wasn't positive things, but it wasn't like I was suicidal, thankfully. And I never cut myself to really hurt myself. It was more of a attention seeking thing for me. And my bulimia was the same as well. But I feel like I had control over all of those things. At least I did in my own brain and my own life.
And when would that come up? That would come up for you when you're under stress, or would it be regular?
Interestingly enough, my bulimia has shown up my whole life, every single family, every Christmas and every Thanksgiving that I spent with my family up until 2 years ago when I stopped spending it with my family. I threw up every Thanksgiving and every Christmas. And then I stopped seeing my family and I stopped throwing up.
Yeah. It's paying attention to what goes on internally, isn't it?
Yes.
And like I said before, it's the curiosity piece of actually the moment when we can pause, bring ourselves into the present moment, and then say, hold on, well, why? Why is this happening? Where is this coming from? Rather than feeling like we're acting blindly or so automatically. And I think that's where empowerment comes in, right? It gives you the opportunity to choose differently, even if you don't every time. Anyone who's faced trauma, they know that this shit is hard, that it keeps coming up, that you're not going to do it every time. But I think it's focusing on the little wins rather than all the times you don't manage to do this, that you do reach for that extra drink, you do slip into those old habits again. Like, no, take the wins every time.
Yes. And I think the biggest connective tissue with all of that is if you are disconnected from yourself, you will never be able to recognize when you are falling or when you are slipping into old patterns because you're so disconnected to yourself. So when we connect back with ourselves, regardless of how much work we've done or not done, when we connect back with ourselves, when we start becoming whole again, we can recognize those things that we could never recognize before, which I think is the first step to really starting to heal.
Yes. One thing you say in your book is, it was just a little remark. You said, hoping about your better self. You said, she's out there, my someone better, she's got to be. And Kimberly, what went through my mind when I read that? I thought, she's not out there. She is in here. She is in here. We always have this external search outwards of us. We need something else to make us feel like we're worthy and it's all going to be better. But actually, it's under the layers. It's deep within and it's always there. And I think anyone on this journey of healing needs to find that place. It's like you say, this journey to wholeness, this journey to authenticity. It's realizing that you've been shielding yourself for so long with layers of beliefs, of intrusions, of all of these horrible things that actually they don't penetrate really to your core, but you just think they do. And I think that's part of the realization is like, no, you are not broken to your core.
Yes. And I think when I wrote about that piece, it was really important for me to sort of get an understanding about where I was in different points of my life and not come from a space where I am now, because I wanted the reader to understand that at that time in my life, that's how I felt. I felt like she was out there. I didn't feel like she was in here.
Exactly.
And I wanted it to read that way because that's really how I felt. It was like, I was externalizing everything instead of going inside myself and really sort of connecting and healing. And for me, the biggest thing that really did that for me was doing my journeys with MDMA and mushrooms. That was like a huge healing aspect to me that changed everything and really taught me how to go inside myself and connect back with who I was. And that's the biggest thing is like, when we have trauma for me, it was 2 or 3 years old, I have no idea who I was. I don't know who I would have been if it didn't happen to me. I don't have any sort of sense of myself. And that's why I say that I defined myself through him for so long, because he was all that I knew that sort of made me who I was. And I was so disconnected to my inner child, to who I was supposed to be, who I was born into this world to be. And until I started doing those journeys, was I able to really connect back with who that person was.
Yeah. Something you say, I think this applies both to family and ourselves, but you say like, we need to mourn the loss of what we hoped our family would have been. And I think leading on from that, it's also mourning the loss of who you hoped you could have been without that too. Because I imagine there's so much grief there. When you say this has been really sustained abuse for you over a long period of time, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I had a lot of anger around that for a long time. Like, who would I have been if he didn't do this to me? And and I spent a lot of years doing that to myself. And really, I was only hurting myself because I can't change what he did. I can't change what happened. What I can change is how I choose to let it affect my life and how I'm going to move through it and become who I'm meant to be, and whatever that looks like after he did what he did. The cliche where they say either you get bitter or you get better. I mean, it's such a silly thing, but I do think that is actually true, because I've seen people get bitter and let their trauma affect their children and their lives, or you do something with it and you try to help other people with your story, which is really what ultimately I'm trying to do.
And it's what you are doing, not what you're trying to do. It's what you are doing.
Thank you.
Was anger a portal for you into the deeper emotions? Because what I've observed is like the repressed anger is often what leads to a lot of the bitterness. I think it has a strong, almost a fiery energy, right? But when you suppress that, it has nowhere to go. And I think that, we say that that's when it leads to health problems, disease, but I think also like a lot of negativity in our mindset and resentment and hostility and contempt, because it's all an inner manifestation of something that should be externalized. Like I genuinely think that I wouldn't have come even to being more stable, more peaceful, more joyful that I am now if I hadn't have pushed through my anger. Like I needed to let that out. And there was anger against people that had hurt me, anger even against myself for so many things that was misplaced, but there. And like letting all of that out, it was the portal to what was underneath, and a lot of that was pain and a heck lot of fear, I don't know if that was your experience too.
Yes, I definitely think that anger is a huge part of the healing process, and we do need to recognize our anger and work through it rather than recognize it and suppress it, or not recognize it at all and suppress it, because I do believe that turns into, and Gabor says this all the time, like suppression is depression. And that's sort of what, when you internalize things and you push them down, it does manifest itself into depression or disease within our body. But yeah, of course, I definitely had to go through a lot of anger and was angry at myself. And I think mostly I put the anger on my inner child. Like I was very angry with her and felt very separate from her for a really long time, and that's why the name of the book is Glimmer, because when I did come full circle with it, I realized that that's exactly what she was. She was my glimmer. She was like the light that never gave up,
Yeah, she is. And I see it in you. And I see that spark and that flame. It's so important to hold on to that and to carry that forward, because it's a lot of the beauty and the love that we transmit through that too. But I know what it's like to reject that part completely. And I think you say, I'm a grown up now, not that little girl in the basement. Fuck that girl. And I felt that. I felt the energy that you had with that. And why were you so angry at her, Kimberly?
Because nobody else was showing up for me to sort of, like, my parents sort of just passed it on as, oh, I didn't remember. Oh, I had no idea. Nobody was taking accountability for the level of abuse that I endured because of their lack of awareness and lack of being able to be a parent. And so everyone in my family was just kind of moving on. It's like, oh, dad didn't know and mom was abused. And, but I think I was just stuck in this sort of whirlwind of like, so whose fault is this? I needed someone to blame. I needed someone to be angry at. And for me, she became who I was angry at, who I could put my anger on at the time.
It's so sad. It's so common. You're absolutely not alone in that. We know that this is a common pattern, but how misplaced it is that for people who have experienced abuse and trauma, that they direct on themselves what is absolutely not theirs to carry.
Yes. Completely.
I guess self-forgiveness was a big part of it, right?
Yes. I think really connecting with her was a big part of my self-forgiveness, because I had put so much on her in my own life and my own brain. Like, this is her fault. And that's where I put all the blame. And being able to fully accept her and love her and connect with her again was the start of my healing journey, literally.
Yeah. You recall a memory at the end of your book, and I'm not sure if it was that something came back to you or you chose particularly to write it at the end of the book, but that you thought that she silenced herself, that she didn't fight back against her abuser, that you didn't stand up for yourself against your grandfather. And then you recall an incident in particular with him in the basement, as you describe, and you were fighting back. And then that helped you.
Well, I think when I started writing and before I actually did my journeys, I knew how bad the sexual abuse was. I didn't recall or remember how physically abusive he was to me until in one of my journeys, I had a memory of him like suffocating me. And I remembered how hard she was fighting back. And not that I really needed that piece to feel everything I feel for her now, but it was kind of like a wake up call for me of that I was this little child who was literally terrified for her life, and that she was stronger than I ever gave her credit for, or ever really realized that she was the one who got us out of all of it in the first place. I wasn't there then, she was.
Yeah, exactly. How has your work life changed? I'm curious. You start by saying that the stunts, the fighting, it was a physical manifestation of the pain that you felt inside. Has that changed?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm just getting older in general. So my work is just different now. And I've really just been trying to focus on the book for the last few years. But I love myself now. And so I interact with the world in a space where I love myself, which is very different than I did my whole life.
Yeah. How does that show up in reality?
For me, making choices that are healthy for me instead of trying to make everybody else happy. And while I was doing that for so many years, I was not being true to myself. And as my daughter gets older, the thing that keeps showing up for me, or has shown up for me with my family, is that the more I don't respect myself and put boundaries into place when it comes to everyone showing up in my life, the less I'm able to give her, and the less I'm able to really show her what real love is and what that looks like. Because our children learn from what we do more than what we say. And
yes,
it's the biggest gift I can give her, is put people in her life that are going to show up in their most authentic, loving ways. And unfortunately, that just hasn't been my family. So that's been the hardest part of all of this for me.
It sounds like being a mum has really changed things for you.
Yes.
What's changed?
Yeah. I will not let her have a sliver of what my childhood looked like. And, that's not only the sexual abuse, that's everyone who participated in the covering up of it all and pretending like it really wasn't that big of a deal. And so the people that I want around my daughter is people that are showing up for themselves. And that's not a lot of people. So, she has a very small circle of women in her life, but all of the women in her life, the older women in her life, are doing the work and showing up for themselves. And that's really important to me.
Mm-hmm. And who do you have in your life on that? I really liked you to speak to like friendships and the importance of other people, because I think people feel more alone than we think.
Yes.
I really do. I really feel like, despite this enormous internet connectivity that we have, the possibilities of communication and cross-national, international communication, I think we are carrying a lot of loneliness. And it can be harder, especially in our busy lives, to have the depth and authentic connection that we actually need, especially people who are going through this journey where they're making sense of themselves, their past, like all of that. You can feel quite isolated in the process, I guess.
Completely. And I think part of that is because, as amazing as social media is for exactly the way I used it, to look up Gabor and to watch him speak, which was, moved mountains for me. But when you're on social media and you're looking at people's posts, there's no real authentic connection there with that person. You may learn something from what they say, but you're not connecting with them like we're sitting here and connecting. And my biggest thing that I have tried to do through the book, when people write me a message, I answer them, and it's me answering them. And I've had conversations with so many people, I have no idea who they are, but have said to me, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me, to acknowledge me. And that's when people start to feel less alone, when you can reach your hand out to a stranger and offer them some words of encouragement or love or connection. I think that means more than having 7 million followers. That's just what I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. Do you have people there for you in that?
I do. My husband's amazing, and I have really great girlfriends that that thankfully are in my life, that I adore, that have become like a family to me. So I do.
And it wasn't an easy journey with your husband, which I think anyone who's faced anything that you've gone through, I think you described him as being like, I considered that he was possibly a murderer because it would make way more sense to me than him being so freaking nice.
Yes, totally. I told Cameron, I said, either he's a sociopath or he's just a really good person.
I'm not going to lie. I think I had a moment of like trauma rising there when I was reading it going, oh dear, is this love bombing? Is this going to be, oh gosh, I'm just waiting for the next, bloody hole of a narcissist or sociopath coming in to, just take it one other level lower, Kimberly, because that's what we all need.
Yes.
But no, totally. That's not how the story ends. You have the fairy tale moment.
we did. But I also think it's important to say and acknowledge that there were many times that I was like going to walk away because, and also now that we're in this space, we've been together for 13 years and have a beautiful daughter, where I really, so many moments that I felt like I didn't deserve it or tried to start a fight and I'm still guilty of that. I think that's the biggest thing too, is like we were talking about, your stuff shows up regardless in your relationship. And I think it's always going to be that. And it's those moments where we can either sit back and say, okay, why am I reacting this way? What's going on inside me? What is triggered inside me? Your triggers are your biggest blessings when you are connected with yourself, because you can stop and say, okay, why did I react that way? I think triggers are really healthy, and they're a really great opportunity for us to go back inside and figure out why we're having the reaction we're having so that we can heal it or we can deal with it or work through it. Because I do a lot of IFS therapy, which is therapy with parts of yourselves. I've spoke about this in my interview with Dr. Schwartz, which was one of the times we did therapy together. His therapy is really amazing. I don't know if you've ever done it.
I have heard of it. A few people have mentioned it. Yeah. Internal family systems, looking at different parts of yourself, the inner child that's been exiled, the firefighter that wants to come in and put all the fires out. So that's like, here, have a drink. Here, go make yourself throw up, or the different parts. I've not done it personally, but I can see how it really helps.
Yes, there's a lot. And after I had done so much work and so much of it, we had a session together, Dr. Schwartz and I, where I sort of I was like in the basement again. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I got her out of the basement. Why am I still in the basement? And then we visited the fact that it was just like a part of me that was still in the basement that I needed to, relieve her of the shame or whatever was going on in the situation. So I think it's really important when we do have our triggers to realize that it's just another part of you that's being triggered, and that we can be curious about it and try to understand it so that hopefully it doesn't happen again in that way.
Yeah. Because something, being honest here about myself, when I have moments where I get triggered about anything, sometimes this is perfectionism shows up for me a lot, wanting to do things really well. And then when I feel like I haven't done something well, or I might not, that is clearly like an inner child wound. It comes up a lot, but then it makes me want to pack everything in. It's like you want to go push it all away, retreat, hide. And it doesn't happen. I think this is part of working through the trigger, right? Like you find a way to come back on center and keep taking action. But like when you have these moments of being triggered, does it make you want to sabotage other areas of your life as well?
Not anymore.
But it
Not
did.
anymore. But it did, yes. Because I wasn't really fully aware of them. I would just come from a very reactive state where I would react and then I would get mad and then I would just lash out in different areas of my life, where now when I get triggered, I know that that's what's happening. and I try to just go outside or like put my feet on the ground. Sounds really silly, but
No.
I've realized that I've been so not connected to the earth and to the ground for so much of my life. So I'm trying to do more of that now.
Not to mention because you're jumping out of buildings a lot, apparently.
Yes.
So
apparently.
literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't you say you had that moment where you were in Positano or something in Italy and you're on your wedding and you jump off a cliff?
Yes, we did.
That cliff is high. I've been there.
It wasn't that high. It wasn't that high.
Okay,
it was only
good.
like 12 feet. Yeah, it wasn't that bad.
Because I was like, oh my gosh, this girl is on a whole nother level of thrill seeking. I can't even do the 3-meter diving board at the local pool. I'm there like
Oh my
sitting
gosh.
out. So yes, you've definitely got that fear side. So what's the next chapter for you, Kimberly? What's exciting you now? What are you looking forward to?
I'm excited to just have some like calmness in my life and in just my brain and not feel like I'm just sort of enjoying this journey of the more I speak about my story, the more I learn about myself as well. And I'm just trying to enjoy that journey. Eventually, we want to make this a film. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, right now we're all on strike, which I think is a good thing. But that's kind of my next
You're
thing
all on
to
strike?
conquer. We are, yes.
As in
Yeah.
the stunt people or?
Actors, like SAG. So actors, stunt people, everybody. Writers, directors, we're all on strike.
Wow, I haven't
Yeah.
seen that. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's what's possibly next. And hey, you're in the
Yes.
place to make it happen.
Yes.
So that could be very powerful.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yes. Well, I think there's something in, you need to have the vision there first, the idea of what it is that you want to give birth to in the world and really believing in that, and then you can make it happen. You know, I think you say at some point you had this sort of maybe everyone in Hollywood is so cutthroat. And then you thought, maybe they're not after all. And just that thought of maybe they're not after all opens you up to a whole new energy, a whole new way of seeing the world. And then that's what you attract in as well.
Yes, completely. 100%.
Yeah. Our field of possibility. I think that's part of it too, right? Just staying open and daring to imagine a possibility, a future that you can't quite see yet,
Yes.
but it could come.
Yes. Manifesting it all. I believe in that.
Yeah. Someone said to you the importance of these 3 things: knowing yourself, knowing your worth, and knowing where you're going.
Yeah. Zoe. Zoe
Tell
Bell.
us about that.
Yeah. When I met her, she had just finished she's a stuntwoman, also an actor who doubled Uma Thurman for Kill Bill. And I had to fight her in my first job in LA, and she had just finished Kill Bill. So everyone was kind of just talking about her, and she was this really sort of prominent figure coming up in our business. And then I got a job and I had to fight her. And so I was terrified, and I was, sure that it was going to be a horrible day at work and I was going to fail miserably. And she was one of the most supportive, loving people ever, and just gave me a new feeling about people in general. And she's still one of my really close friends, and just really made an imprint on my life in that moment.
And the importance of these 3 things. Where are you struggling the most with that? Knowing yourself, knowing what you want, knowing your worth?
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm really struggling with any of those things anymore. And not that it doesn't show up, and not that I don't feel that, but the level of what I feel about those things is a lot lower than how intense it used to show up in my life, for sure.
Yeah. That's so amazing. Can I say that?
Thank you.
Really. Well done. I think it's really a testament to the work you've done, because I know there's a lot of pain, a lot of struggle,
Yes.
and a lot of courage that comes along with that.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm going to move into the final fast few questions, Kimberly. And first thing I wanted to ask you is there something that you used to believe about yourself that you no longer believe?
That family is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big one to deconstruct.
Yes.
And what has that represented for you?
for me, it really truly comes down to attachment over authenticity. And we come into this world and we're attached to our parents and we're attached to our siblings, and they represent everything that sort of takes care of us in this life, right? They're who we go to for anything. What I've realized on my journey is that sometimes they're not who they're supposed to be. And we can go outside the family system and find people that are there for us in ways that they never were, and that's okay.
That is okay. Second, what are you most proud of?
My daughter.
Yeah.
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 And last, what is a closing message that you want to give our listeners who are on their own healing and self-development journey?
That it's all possible, and that it's all really painful as well. And that you have to be able to take both of those things in as you start walking in that direction of healing, and that you can't compare yourself to where other people are or what their journey looked like, because all of our journeys are extremely different. And the more you can stay focused on yourself and your purpose and how you want to show up in the world, the stronger and more peaceful you're going to end up when you feel like you're starting to actually really heal.
So true. And there's something intrinsic in us all, this satisfaction that comes with progress. And there's undoubtedly something for everyone I've spoken to who's on this healing journey as such, getting more aware, letting go, I should say, of their past and their difficulties and their hardships and forging a new life. And it is painful. And yet when people start, I find so many of us want to keep going.
Oh, yeah.
Once you've had that glimmer, to use your book reference here, once you've had that glimmer there and that taste of what it genuinely feels like to be calm and connected and freer than you ever were before, there's a reward enough to keep going.
Because I think that we all want to return to ourselves. That's like an innate thing that we don't even realize how much we need it until we start walking towards it. It's really the only way to true liberation and love, I think.
Exactly. Love being one of the most important things in that. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing your story. It's been a pleasure. And for everyone listening as well, I was so deeply touched and moved by Kimberly's book and her story of strength, of courage, of resilience, of hope. It was just, it's really beautiful. So I'd really recommend you go and get yourself a copy.
Thank you so much.